My name's Ryan, I'm 29, and I think the worst part of this story is how normal the day started. We were just having lunch at my dad's house. Nothing fancy, just burgers on the grill and a few cold beers. My younger brother Ethan was there. He's 21 now. My dad, obviously, and my dad's girlfriend who never really talks much. At first, everything felt fine. Small talk, work updates, the usual catching up. We don't see each other super often, maybe once every couple of months, but it wasn't weird. Not until Ethan made a joke that hit a little too close to home. He said, "Well, at least you're not still crying over Megan," then laughed. I froze. Because there was no reason for him to know that name, and especially no reason for him to know about what happened between me and her. Megan was my ex. We broke up 2 years ago, and it messed me up more than I admitted to anyone at the time. We dated for almost 3 years, and for a while, I thought she was the one. When it ended, I didn't tell my family the details. All I said was that it didn't work out. I never gave names. Never shared anything specific, especially not with Ethan. We were never that close, and he was a teenager when Megan and I were together. So when he threw that out like it was just some offhand joke, I knew something was off. My dad looked down at his plate when I stared at him. Didn't say anything. That was the moment I knew there was more to the story. I just didn't realize how deep it went. I asked Ethan, as casually as I could, how he knew about Megan. He kind of shrugged and said, "I don't know. Dad mentioned her once." That might have sounded innocent, but it wasn't. Because like I said, I never told my dad her name either. Back when the breakup happened, I was a mess, and I didn't want to talk about it with him. We've always had a complicated relationship. He's the kind of guy who thinks emotions are weakness and that you should man up and move on. So I never gave him the details. But here was Ethan, throwing around Megan's name and acting like it was some old family joke. I looked back at my dad again and said, "How do you know her name?" He still didn't look at me. Just took a bite of his food like I hadn't said anything. That silence was all I needed. My brain went into overdrive, thinking back through everything. How would he have known her name? How would he have known enough to talk about her to Ethan? And then a darker thought hit me. I remembered that one time, months before Megan and I split, when she got weird about texting someone and wouldn't say who. I let it go. I didn't want to be the jealous boyfriend. But now that moment was stuck in my head like a knife. I put my fork down and asked directly, "Did you ever talk to Megan? Like after we broke up?" That finally made my dad look up. And I swear to God, the look on his face told me everything before he even opened his mouth. He didn't answer right away. He just kind of sighed, leaned back in his chair, and said, "She reached out after the breakup." I figured it wasn't my place to get in the middle. That alone would have been bad enough, but the way he said it made it worse. Like he was minimizing it. Like it was no big deal. I asked, "So you just, what?" Chatted with her behind my back. He shrugged again and said, "She was going through a rough time. You were too. I didn't want to make things worse." That's when Ethan jumped in with, "Yeah, Dad used to say you were too emotional about her, that you dodged a bullet." And I swear, I felt like the room was spinning. Not just because they talked about me like that, but because Ethan clearly knew way more than he should have. I started putting things together that I'd ignored at the time. Like how Megan once mentioned she'd heard from someone that I had issues with commitment. Or that time she canceled a weekend trip last minute, saying she had a family thing she couldn't get out of. But later I saw she'd been tagged near my dad's neighborhood. Back then I told myself I was being paranoid. Now it felt like a gut punch. I stood up from the table and said, "You talked to her while we were still together, didn't you?" My dad didn't deny it. He just said, "It wasn't like that." Which, by the way, is exactly what someone says when it was absolutely like that. That's when I lost it. I didn't yell or throw anything, but I just felt this surge of cold go through my whole body. I said, "You crossed a line, Dad. That was my relationship. You don't get to be involved like that." And he gave me that same look he always gives when he doesn't want to take responsibility, like I was overreacting, like this was somehow my fault. I turned to Ethan and said, "What else did he tell you?" And Ethan, clearly caught in the middle now, just said, "I don't know, man, just stuff. That she dumped you because you were too clingy. That she said you weren't ambitious." And that was it. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just some small boundary being crossed. My dad had actively helped write the version of the breakup that made him look good and me look like a wreck. I walked out. I didn't say goodbye, didn't take anything with me, just left. Drove around for a while, hands shaking on the steering wheel, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I kept replaying all the conversations I'd had with Megan in the last months of our relationship, trying to find the signs. And they were there. They were always there. I just didn't see them because I trusted both of them in different ways. I trusted her not to go behind my back, and I trusted him to have my back. Turns out neither of them earned that. And the thing that burned the most wasn't even what they did. It was the fact that they let me think for years that I was the only one hurting. I didn't talk to either of them for a few weeks after that. I ignored texts, calls, even one awkward voicemail from my dad that just said, "I think you're overreacting. Let's be adults about this." That voicemail pissed me off more than anything. No apology, no accountability, just that classic tone like I was being irrational for finally drawing a line. During those weeks, I started going back through old photos and texts with Megan, trying to figure out when things shifted, when the connection between her and my dad might have started. I couldn't find one moment that confirmed it, but there were definitely gaps. Times she told me she was out with a friend and wouldn't answer her phone. Times she seemed distant but insisted she was just tired. And now I couldn't unsee it. Every red flag felt like a neon sign I ignored. Eventually, Ethan texted me and asked if we could meet. I didn't want to, but part of me felt like he deserved a chance to explain himself. So we met up for coffee. He looked uncomfortable as hell, and the first thing he said was, "I didn't mean to mess anything up." I asked him why he brought Megan up that day, and he said he thought I already knew they had talked. That Dad had told him it was no big deal, that I'd moved on. That's when it really hit me. My dad had been spinning this story to make himself look like the wise, neutral father figure who helped a poor girl through a rough time. Meanwhile, he was feeding my little brother details about my life like I was some cautionary tale. And he really thought I'd never find out. I asked Ethan flat out, did they ever meet in person? He hesitated for a second, which was all I needed. He said, "I think so. Yeah. Once or twice, maybe more." Dad said it was just to check on her. That was the final nail for me. I didn't know what those meetings looked like, what was said, or how far it went, but it didn't matter. The betrayal wasn't about cheating, necessarily. It was about trust. The woman I loved and the father I was still trying to earn approval from had made some kind of alliance behind my back, while I was spiraling through one of the worst periods of my life. And then they just let me believe I'd been too needy, too emotional, too weak. I started to feel like my whole breakup was choreographed to make me feel like the villain. I left the coffee shop more confused than before. Not about what happened, but about what to do now. There wasn't going to be some big confrontation that made everything click into place. There wasn't going to be an apology that made it okay. I didn't want to scream or throw things or post some dramatic call-out online. What I felt was quieter, colder. Just the steady ache of being used, lied to, and dismissed by people I thought were mine. I got in my car and just sat there for a while, trying to figure out what the hell kind of person does that to their own son. I kept wondering if he even realized how badly he'd screwed me up, or if he was just sitting at home, still convinced he'd done nothing wrong. A few days later, my dad sent me a text. It said, "We should talk. You're blowing this out of proportion." I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say that wouldn't turn into another round of him deflecting and me losing my mind. I showed the message to a friend, and he asked me what I was hoping to get out of this. Closure? Justice? I didn't even know. Maybe just for someone to admit that what they did was wrong, that I wasn't crazy for feeling like something deeply personal was violated. But I knew my dad. He'd never own it. He'd say whatever made him look like the adult in the room. He was always good at that, playing the part of the calm, reasonable father while quietly pulling strings in the background. After that, I stopped reaching out. Birthdays came and went, holidays passed, and I kept my distance. I started therapy, mostly to deal with how angry I still felt, not just about Megan and my dad, but about years of being talked over, brushed aside, made to feel like I was always too much. My therapist said something that stuck with me. Sometimes the most painful thing isn't what happened. It's realizing they never saw a problem with it. That hit hard. Because my dad didn't just mess up once. He chose, over and over, to cross lines he had no right to cross. And when I found out, he didn't try to make it right. He tried to make me feel like I was wrong for caring. I think what still stings the most is how alone I felt during that whole time. When Megan and I broke up, I remember lying on my couch for days, barely eating, feeling like everything I built had just collapsed. And all that time, my dad knew things I didn't. He had information that would have changed how I processed everything. He watched me fall apart and said nothing. That part, I can't shake. I've tried to convince myself that maybe he thought he was protecting me, but the truth is, he was protecting his own image. He didn't want to be the bad guy. He wanted to play the wise father, the peacekeeper. But peacekeepers don't build peace by stabbing people in the back and then pretending they were helping all along. There's this memory that keeps coming back. It was maybe 6 months before the breakup. Megan and I were at my dad's place for dinner. She seemed comfortable, too comfortable. She laughed at all his jokes, helped him clean up afterward, even stayed back in the kitchen while I went to the car to grab something. At the time, I thought, great, she gets along with my dad. That's supposed to be a good thing, right? But now I think about what they might have said when I wasn't in the room. What kind of conversations happened without me? It's one of those things that turns your stomach years later, because you realize you were in the middle of something and didn't even know you were being watched, judged, talked about. Like your life was playing out for someone else's benefit. After all of that, I started asking myself why I didn't see it coming. Not just with Megan, but with my dad. Why I kept giving him chances. Why I wanted so badly to believe he was a better man than he really was. I think a part of me still wanted his approval, even into adulthood. It's like I had this idea of who he could have been if he just tried harder, if he cared more. I wanted him to be proud of me, to actually see me. And for some stupid reason, I thought maybe if I just kept showing up, kept giving him space, he'd eventually come around. That he'd meet me halfway. But this whole thing made it clear, he doesn't meet people halfway. He only shows up when it benefits him. What hit me later was how much that shaped my relationships. I started thinking about other times I overlooked red flags, let people treat me like an afterthought, stayed in situations that drained me because I thought it was normal. I grew up thinking love was something you earned by being low maintenance. That if I didn't make waves, people would stay. But that's not love. That's just survival. And once I saw that, it changed everything. I stopped chasing people who made me feel small. I cut off my dad for good after that last text. Didn't respond. Didn't explain. Just disappeared from his life the way he slowly disappeared from mine. Only I did it on purpose. Ethan still tries to reach out every once in a while. He doesn't really pick sides, but I think deep down he knows our dad screwed up. Sometimes he sends me a meme or a random update, like we're still cool, like nothing ever happened. I don't blame him. He was young, and honestly, he got caught in something that wasn't his fault. But I also don't go out of my way to respond anymore. It's not about punishing anyone. It's just that some bridges don't need rebuilding. I've learned that protecting your peace isn't dramatic. It's necessary. And the more time passes, the more I realize that just because someone's family doesn't mean they get a free pass to keep hurting you. One time, I ran into Megan at a grocery store. It was probably a year after everything came out. She looked surprised to see me and gave me this awkward smile like she didn't know if she should say something. I just nodded and kept walking. I didn't owe her anything. She never reached out to apologize, never tried to explain her side. I guess she thought if enough time passed, it would all be water under the bridge. But for me, it wasn't about the breakup anymore. It was about how easy it was for her to align herself with someone who was supposed to protect me. I wasn't angry when I saw her. I just felt nothing. And honestly, that felt like a win. That silence, that feeling of nothingness when I saw her, made me realize how far I'd come. A year before, that same run-in would have sent me spiraling. I would have spent days overthinking it, wondering what I could have said, what it meant, if she felt guilty. But standing there in that grocery aisle, all I felt was this quiet confirmation that I didn't need closure from her. Or from him. I had given myself enough of it. I went back to my car, sat there for a moment, and let myself be proud, not because I handled everything perfectly, but because I didn't let it break me permanently. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was fully in my own story again. I've told a few close friends about what happened, but I've never shared all of it like this. Maybe part of me felt ashamed for how long it took me to see it clearly. Or maybe I just didn't think people would believe how subtle and quiet emotional betrayal can be. When people talk about family issues, they expect dramatic blow-ups, screaming matches, fists through walls. But sometimes the real damage comes from the things people say in quiet corners, the half-truths, the narratives they build when you're not around. And when you finally see it for what it is, you're left standing in the middle of a version of your life you didn't even know they were rewriting behind your back. I started journaling around that time, not because I wanted to be poetic or deep, but because I needed to make sense of what happened. I'd write out memories, things I remembered Megan saying, things my dad had done over the years that didn't sit right. The more I wrote, the more I started to see a pattern. This wasn't the first time my dad had undermined me, it was just the first time it was this obvious. In high school, he used to joke about how I'd never be as smart as he was. When I got my first job, he told me not to get too comfortable because real life would humble me. It was always masked as tough love, but now I knew better. He didn't know how to support without condescension. He didn't know how to see me without measuring me against his own ego. And I guess Megan fed right into that. She was charming, good with people, but deep down, I think she liked being in control too. I don't know what she got out of talking to him behind my back, validation, maybe? Someone to gaslight me with? It's still hard to wrap my head around. But I've stopped needing all the answers. Some people just do selfish things and never look back. Trying to understand them doesn't make the wound smaller. It just keeps it open longer. So I let it close. Or at least I'm trying to. It still flares up sometimes, like if I see a photo or smell something that reminds me of her, but it passes quicker now. I can breathe through it. I don't feel like I'm drowning in it anymore. There was one last thing that really sealed it for me. A few months ago, I got a letter in the mail from my dad. Not an email, not a text, an actual handwritten letter. It was short. He said he hoped I was doing well and that maybe one day I'd look back and understand that he was only ever trying to help. No apology. No acknowledgement of what he did. Just this vague, self-serving message that made it seem like I'd misinterpreted his actions. I read it once and threw it in a drawer. I didn't rage or cry or feel much of anything. It felt like someone trying to rewrite a story they never had permission to narrate in the first place. That's when I realized I didn't need him to own it anymore. He could live in his own version of events, and I'd live in mine. But mine was built on truth. A couple days after that, I went through my phone and deleted old photos. Not just of Megan, but of family dinners, texts with Ethan from around that time, even screenshots of stuff I'd kept as evidence. I didn't want it anymore. Not out of spite, but because it didn't serve me to keep curating a museum of pain. I backed up what I needed, then cleared it out. It felt weirdly freeing. Like I was physically making space for a version of myself that wasn't stuck in the middle of other people's lies. I wasn't their puppet anymore. I wasn't their sounding board. I was just me again. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. I don't think I'll ever get a real explanation. Not from Megan, not from my dad. And weirdly, I've made peace with that. Some stories don't end with closure or apologies. They just stop, like a song cutting off in the middle of a verse. You're left sitting in silence, trying to hum the rest of it on your own. That's what this has been for me. A quiet fade-out. No dramatic ending, no final confrontation. Just the realization that the people you thought were in your corner never really were. And that's heavy. But it also forces you to get real about who you let into your life moving forward. Who gets your trust? Who gets your silence? Who gets to know your pain? A while back, someone at work was going through a rough breakup and asked me how I moved on from mine. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I didn't even know where to start. How do you explain that your breakup wasn't just about losing someone you loved, but realizing that the people closest to you helped that loss happen? I told him, you just wake up one day and decide to stop bleeding for people who never cared if you were hurt. I don't think he fully understood what I meant, but I did. And maybe that's enough. Sometimes I wonder if my dad ever tells anyone about me. If he rewrites the story for them, too. Maybe I'm the bitter son who couldn't handle a breakup, or the dramatic one who cut off his own family. I'll never know, and honestly, I don't care anymore. Because the people who matter in my life now know the real version. They know me for who I am, not who he tried to make me out to be. I've stopped explaining myself to people who already made up their minds. That was the hardest part, letting go of the need to be understood by the very people who never really wanted to understand me in the first place. And when I finally stopped chasing that, things started to feel a little less heavy. So that's it, really. That's the day everything unraveled. It started with an awkward joke at a family dinner and ended with a silence I still carry around, even if it doesn't hurt the same way anymore. I don't tell this story for sympathy. I'm telling it because I think sometimes we need to say things out loud to finally let them go, to make them real, to remind ourselves that what happened did happen, even if no one else wants to acknowledge it. I've stopped waiting for the moment where it all makes sense, or where someone explains it in a way that makes it okay. It's never going to come. And weirdly, that's the most peaceful part.